So I recently went on a quest to find the best bang for the buck in a mini PC. I didn't care if it was a couple of years old, I just wanted to be able to play some games, I had a list of features that I wanted in it, and I didn't want it to break the bank. Now there's a lot of options out there, but the best one for me was the Minisforum Elitemini TH50. Let's check it out. Hey everybody, it's Chris from FamilyGeekery, and today we're going to be checking out this Minisforum Elitemini TH50 mini PC. Now recently I made a video about building this guy right here. This is what I called the Steam Cube, and that was basically a bare bones computer that was all just ready to go. You had to put in a processor and your RAM and your SSD so you can kind of pick the configuration, and I went with an AMD so I can get those Radeon graphics, and I wanted it to be similar to the performance of a Steam Deck but just in a desktop form. So I've been playing around with that, but I really wanted to try one of these mini PCs that had the Intel Iris graphics, the Iris Xe. So that's what I wanted to do. Went on a quest, like I said, to find something that was going to have all these features that I wanted, to see how it compared up against this AMD version of the Steam Cube. So we're going to be taking a look at this one today. If you want to see a comparison between the two, let me know down in the comments below, and I'll make a video comparing the graphics performance between that Radeon-based processor and the Intel Iris Xe. Now specifically on this, I wanted to find one of these that had the 96 execution unit version of the Intel Iris Xe graphics, and that's kind of the best one that they have right now. So I found a post on Reddit that had a list of probably, hundreds if not thousands of these mini PCs, and it had all the specs listed out. And it was kind of easy to go right through the columns and look for things that you were looking for. So in my case, I was kind of looking for that 96 execution unit Intel Iris Xe graphics. And there wasn't a whole lot of them. But once I found that, then I was looking for something that also had Thunderbolt 4. So this one happens to have Thunderbolt 4 on it also, which gives you the options of possibly even plugging in an external GPU if you wanted to. So we may test that out, but really I'm just interested in the performance of this thing, how it is right out of the box. Now speaking of right out of the box, I happened to find this on Amazon, and it was one of their open box or Amazon, returns or whatever it was, but it came to me, I'm pretty sure, brand new. Everything was still sealed up. It didn't have the original box on the outside of it, but it had a manufacturer's box with all the goodies inside, the manual, and all the accessories were still sealed up in plastic. So I'm not sure if it was maybe just purchased and returned without the outer box to it, but I got a heck of a deal on it, and I'm pretty excited to test this thing out. Alright, so before we boot this thing up, let's go ahead and take a look at the outside and look at all the inputs and outputs that it's got. Obviously in the front here we've got this power button, we've got a couple audio jacks here, easy to get to. We've got two USB 3s, and I actually think they're USB 3.1s right on the front here. And then more importantly, we got this Thunderbolt 4 port here, which has a please don't plug in power to it. And I've read several times online that if you do plug in power delivery to that, it will fry this thing. So I think that's why they put a sticker on it. And that's because on the back here, if we look at the power input is a USB-C. So it's kind of hard to see. There we go. So it's a USB-C power input, and the power brick that comes with it is a 19 volt power brick, but it has a USB-C connector on it. I'm going to test out later if that is actually power delivery, if power delivery will work in this. Usually power delivery is like 20 volts, but it may just work just fine, hopefully without frying anything. But besides the power input there, we've got a display port and an HDMI output for video. We've got two LAN ports at 2.5 gigahertz each. We've got two more USB-A's with a USB 3, and then we got two more USB-A's with USB 2. So plenty of input and output on this thing, and then of course the Thunderbolt port allows you to plug in any kind of Thunderbolt dock and get all kinds of more I/O if you need it. As far as design goes, it comes in a really small design, smaller I think than my Steam Cube. It's got pretty good heat transfer. I've been testing this thing out with several games, and it never gets really super hot. You can feel the heat coming out the sides here. I believe it pulls in air on the top and then spits it out on the sides, but it never gets super hot. And then on the bottom we've got an option of attaching a plate that came with it, so you can put it on a VESA mount, so you could pop this thing right on the back of your monitor if you wanted to. And speaking of that, here's the mounting plate that it comes with. That's going to hook up to, like I said, any kind of VESA plate. This is a hard drive bracket that you can install up to two 2.5-inch SATA hard drives in there, and they give you two of these, which is going to be the SATA connector that plugs into the bottom of this motherboard and allows you to plug two of these. So you get two of these to plug in two more drives if you want to. And you can see, like I said, everything is still wrapped up in its original packaging, still sealed up, and it came with all the screws necessary to mount all that stuff too. So I think the next thing we should do is go ahead and plug this thing in, boot it up, and take a look at Windows inside it. Alright, so here we are inside Windows, and this actually came pre-installed with Windows 11 Pro. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the hardware here that's inside. So starting off with the processor, we've got an 11th gen, the i5-11320H, and that's a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, which is obviously not the strongest, but it's plenty good for this size computer. i7 would have made it a little bit stronger, but I didn't find anything in the i7 range that had these other features that I wanted that was anywhere close to this price. Now next up we got the 16 gigs of memory, and I've got some good news and bad news on this. I'll start with the bad news first, and that is that this 16 gigs is soldered onto the board. There's no way to upgrade it or downgrade it. The good news is there's no way to upgrade it. So I wanted to keep this thing at a budget, and having this 16 gigs built on there kind of forces my hand into not even wondering if I should upgrade it to 32 or not. So 16 gigs is plenty fine for everything I want to do with this thing, and it is set here at this 3200 mega transfer speed. So I'm pretty happy with that. Next up we got the SSD. So this came with a 500 gigabyte NVMe drive, and there's only one slot in there, so if you wanted to upgrade that, you'd have to obviously take this out and put a bigger one in. But the good news is on that again is that it's got those two SATA cables that come with it. You can mount two drives in there. So if you needed a lot of storage for games or something, slap a 2 terabyte 2.5-inch drive, and that's going to be plenty big. Next up we got Wi-Fi 6, so that's good. Of course on a mini PC you want it to be wireless. And then here's that Intel Iris Xe graphics. So here's the system about screen, again showing the processor and the RAM in there, and then showing this Windows 11 Pro already installed and ready to go. So next up I wanted to do a couple quick benchmarks with 3D Mark, and I loaded up their Steel Nomad Lite, which is meant for these types of mini PCs with integrated graphics. And I ran this first one as a custom run with the 900p resolution, so 1600 by 900p, and I got a 17.22 frames per second. So let me go ahead and load up one I also did with 720, and I did these kind of just to get close to that Steam Deck resolution, and this one ran at 22.34 frames per second. Now I'm going to use these two benchmarks to compare up against that Steam Cube that I built, so stay tuned for the channel when I compare those two to see if the Intel Iris Xe is better or if the AMD graphics is better for integrated graphics. So benchmarks are fine and all, but I wanted to play a game with this thing, so I'm going to load up No Man's Sky and we're going to check out the performance of playing the game. Alright, so here we are in No Man's Sky, and I believe this defaulted at 1080p. We'll check that in just a second. And I'm getting over 30 frames per second, no problem. Obviously not perfect, but again, this is a mini PC running a modern game at 1080p, so let's go ahead and go into the settings here and see if we can change that. So yeah, it defaulted at 1080p, so let's go ahead and bring this down. First we're going to bring it down to 1280 by 800, which should match that Steam Deck setting. We'll apply that and see what kind of frames per second we can get now. So yes, it definitely improved. We're getting 55, 56 frames per second, and it's playing great. You know, this is absolutely playable. So again, this is a modern game playing at almost 60 frames per second. Let's see if we brought that down to 720, what we can get out of it. And now we're at 720, and it's just at the 59-60 frames per second. So I'm pretty happy with the fact that we can play it at 1080p at 30 frames per second, or if we just drop it down a little bit to like 800p, then we can play it pretty close to 60 frames per second. Alright, another benchmark I wanted to run was Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and I ran this on both 720 high and 720 low, and you can see the results here on 720 high, about 27 frames per second on the average, and when I ran it on 720 low, it was about 40 frames per second. So definitely playable, and of course you got to remember this is still a mini PC with no GPU, playing a AAA game. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and try this again with an external GPU. So let me go ahead and get that set up. Alright, so I'm back with some not so great news. I tried plugging the eGPU right into the Thunderbolt 4 port, plugged it all in, and Windows 11 is just supposed to recognize it right away, and it didn't. Now I could hear this thing was powered up fine, but the fan was never spinning on the GPU. So I troubleshot a little bit with some drivers and tried a couple other things, found some drivers from Minisforum's website, and most of the drivers were labeled as Windows 10 because Windows 11 I think is just supposed to natively understand Thunderbolt, but after lots and lots of troubleshooting, I never got it to come up at all. So just to double check that it's not the eGPU, I grabbed a laptop that I've tested this out with plenty of times before, plugged it right into the laptop, and it worked right away. It was recognized by Windows, the GPU fan spun up, and it just worked. So I'm not sure exactly what's happening with the Minisforum and its Thunderbolt port, but for right now I couldn't get it figured out, so we're just going to have to skip that. I'll keep trying though. So the last thing I wanted to try is to see if I could bypass this 19-volt power adapter and go straight to power delivery USB-C. Now the power supply that comes with it is set up for 65 watts, so 19 volts at 3.42 watts. So you would need a power supply that was at least 65 watts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little guy here, this little Jackery battery bank, because the USB-C output on here is a max of 100 watts. So I'm going to plug this with a 100 watt cable straight into here and try to boot it up and see if it works. Alright, so that didn't work either. So I plugged this guy into here with a USB-C cable that's capable of 100 watts, and it didn't do anything at all. But I did also take the supplied power supply and I plugged it in line with one of these guys, which is just a watt meter for USB-C, and plugged it in. And I wasn't sure if this was specific to power delivery only, but it did show. So once it was booted up, it was showing about 33 watts being used at idle as it was booting. So at least this does work, but as far as plugging into a power delivery source, I tried a couple different ones that are both capable of 100 watts, and neither one of them worked. So that's kind of a bummer. I really hate that a company can use a USB-C connector as a power input to a computer that doesn't recognize power delivery, but that's just one of the downsides of USB-C being a connector type and not being super standardized. So I think for right now that's going to do it for this video. We went through all the specs, showed you all the ports, showed you inside Windows, everything that it starts with. So hopefully that was informational to you. We tried out a couple nifty alternatives, and I couldn't get them to work today, but I'll keep trying. I do want to test these benchmarks that we did on this up against that Steam box, so stay tuned for that. But if you enjoyed this video, I hope you give me a thumbs up. I appreciate that. If you want to see more reviews and more silly geekery, go ahead and check out the rest of the channel. That's going to wrap it up for this video. I appreciate you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.